Okay, let us get ready, get set, go. So we start with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, so today we will be taking in the Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 104. This is called the Samagama Sutta, the discourse at the place called Samagama. And this sutta seems to have a certain affinity with the sutta that we took last week, or was it 2 weeks ago? Sutta number 103. They're both concerned with how to preserve unity and harmony in the Sangha, particularly as the Buddha is deep in old age and coming to the end of his lifespan. So he has to lay down certain guidelines, measures, regulations in order to ensure that conflicts and disputes don't divide the community, especially the monastic community, and so that the Dharma will last long in the world. Okay, so this sutta has a special, there's a special event that took place to explain the origin of this sutta, as we'll see from the beginning, at the beginning. Okay, so the sutta takes place when the Buddha was living in a town named, or a village named Samagama, which was in his own native land, the Sakyan country. And the event that inspired the sutta was the passing away of the leader of the Jains, who's in the Buddha's text called Nigantanataputta, but who is known to his own followers as Mahavira, the great hero, or as the Jaina, the victor or the conqueror. Okay, and so shortly before the sutta takes place, the Nigantanataputta had just died at a town called Pava. And then the sutta tells us that shortly after his death, the Nigantas had divided and split into two, and they had taken to quarreling and brawling, and were deep in disputes, stabbing each other with verbal daggers. It's very picturesque language. But this is the standard kind of description which is used whenever quarrels take place amongst any group. Even when quarrels take place in the Buddha Sangha, we find the same description is used. For example, in Sutta number 48, which is the discourse at Kosambi, when the Buddhist monastic community living at the town or city of Kosambi had become divided. And so we read on page 419 that on that occasions the bhikkhus at Kosambi had taken to quarreling and brawling and were deep in disputes, stabbing each other with verbal daggers. So this is a standard description of a quarrel that takes place within any group of people. Okay, but then the text continues and it illustrates or elaborates on how the two divisions of the Jain community were arguing with each other. They were saying, each one was saying, you do not understand this Dhamma and discipline. Interestingly, it uses the two words which are distinctive of the Buddha's teaching. Dhamma, actually all the Indian schools call their teaching Dhamma. But here we have the word Vinaya also used. So perhaps it was the case that each school would also call its own code of discipline the Vinaya. So maybe that was not a term unique to Buddhism. Okay, so they would say, you don't understand this Dhamma and discipline. I, or my side, understands this Dhamma and discipline. How could you understand? Your way is wrong, my way is right. I'm consistent, you're inconsistent. What should have been said first, you said last. What should have been said last, you said first. What you had so carefully thought up has been turned inside out. Your claim has been disproven. You are refuted. Go and learn better, or disentangle yourself if you can. And so it said that it seemed as if there were nothing but slaughter among the Niganta Nataputa's pupils. And then his white-robed lay disciples had become disgusted, dismayed, and disappointed with Nataputa's monastic pupils, as they were with his badly proclaimed and badly expounded Dhamma and discipline, which was unemancipating, not conducive to peace, expounded by one not fully enlightened, and which was now with its shrine broken. The shrine probably would have been Mahavira, Niganta Nataputa himself, and left without a refuge. You know, when we read about this description of the conflict, quarrels, disputes taking place amongst the Jains, again, I have to make a disclaimer. I'm not a Jain agent in disguise who spent some 35 years, actually that was 40 years as a Buddhist monk, so that in my 40th year of monastic life I could come out and come to the defense of the Jains. But we do have to remember that this is a description coming from the Buddhists, and the Buddhists and the Jains were rival communities in the same part of India. You know, the northeast states, Magadha, Kosala, Kosambi. And occasionally I've looked at the Jain texts, which are very boring to read because they're mostly descriptions of the minutiae of ascetic observances. But I would imagine where they're describing what takes place in the Buddhist community after the passing away of the Buddha. I don't imagine that if they say anything about it, that they would be flattering, speaking about the great harmony and unity and concord that prevailed amongst the Buddhists after the passing away of the ascetic Gautama. Okay, anyway, after the passing away of Mahavira, and then this conflict breaks out in the Jain community. Then there's a novice by the name of Chunda, who is said to have been the younger, I think probably the youngest brother of Sariputta. So he had spent the rainy season at Pava, because Pava was also right in the heart of the area where the Buddhists had been circulating and promulgating their teaching. And so Chunda would have spent, according to the text, he had spent the rains retreat at Pava, and so he would have gotten a first-hand account of the passing away of Mahavira. And so after the rains retreat, then he probably comes back to comes to Samagama in order to, again, to meet with the Buddha. And so first he comes to Venerable Ananda, because Venerable Ananda, of course, is the Buddha's personal attendant. And so in order to present some news to the Buddha, it's like Ananda is like the secretary, so you don't go immediately into the boss's office, but first you have to pass through the secretary. And so Chunda comes to Ananda and pays homage to him, and then reports to him what has taken place with the Jains. And then Ananda says to the novice Chunda that this is important news which should be told to the Buddha himself. And so they decide to go to the Buddha and to report it to him. And so the two of them go to the Buddha, and Ananda tells the Buddha everything that he's heard from the novice Chunda. And then Ananda makes a very important statement. He says, "When I heard this, the thought occurred to me, let no dispute arise in the Sangha when the Blessed One has gone, when the Blessed One has passed away. For such a dispute would be for the harm and unhappiness of many people, for the loss, harm, and suffering of the devas and the human beings." So if there's a dispute in the Sangha, a big quarrel or conflict in the Sangha, it would be not only for the harm and loss of human beings, but also of the devas or deities. Because the deities, there's a class of deities which are called the Dharma-protecting deities, who try to protect the Dhamma in the human world and to see that it will endure a long time. And the deities delight when there's harmony and concord amongst the Buddhists and the human world. And if there was to be a dispute, a conflict, a schism in the Sangha, then even the devas would become miserable and upset. Okay, so now the Buddha, when he hears this, he's going to emphasize what is important to ensure that the Dharma will last long in the world. So he says to Ananda, "These things that I have taught you on the basis of my own direct knowledge, that is, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 4 right efforts, or 4 right kinds of striving, the 4 bases for spiritual power, the 5 faculties, the 5 powers, the 7 enlightenment factors, the Noble Eightfold Path. Do you see even 2 monks who are making different claims, different explanations, different interpretations of these things?" Okay, so these are the teachings that the Buddha is emphasizing as the basis for unity and harmony in the Sangha. And the Buddha here, he doesn't elaborate upon them, he just mentions the main headings. But I'm sure that there are people here who could help us to understand them. Aren't there? 4 foundations of mindfulness. a little rusty. Who can help? Michael? We have to get them in order, not only to get them correctly, but in the correct order.
I don't think so. Body, mind, no, that's not the order. Feelings, body, feelings, mind, and the last one I don't know how to say. Mind consciousness or mind result?
Sometimes they translate as mental objects, but I don't think that's so good. It's almost hard, it's very hard to translate. We just call it Dhammas, mindfulness of Dhammas. Okay, so the four foundations of mindfulness are the body, feelings, mind or states of mind, and phenomena, which are, I'm not going to go into an explanation, but just phenomena organized into certain groups for contemplation. The four right efforts. We have to give some others the turn. Come, come. You want to take it? You take the microphone.
Any unwholesome states of mind that arise, you like put to the side.
Have to get the right order.
I'm not sure the right order. Is the first one wrong? A wrong order?
It's a correct item, but it's not
Wrong
the first one.
Okay, any wholesome mindsets?
No, the wholesome never comes before the unwholesome.
Okay. Any unwholesome mindsets that has not yet arisen, you keep away. Or you
Okay, so you prevent
suppress.
the arising of unarisen, unwholesome states.
Right.
Okay. Second.
Any unwholesome states that have already arisen, you forcefully push to the side.
Well, it doesn't have to be forcefully, but we use a certain key word that always occurs in the Buddha's texts. It starts with an A, followed by a B, followed by an A.
I don't know.
Followed by an N.
Abstain?
What?
No.
A, B, A, N. Abandon.
Right.
So
any unwholesome states that have
unwholesome states that arise, one abandons them. Third.
Any wholesome states that has not yet arisen, you provoke.
Yeah.
Or you arouse.
Arouse, yeah.
And any
to arouse unarisen, wholesome mental states. And then the fourth one.
Any unwholesome states that has.
Any what?
Any wholesome states that has not yet arisen. Any unwholesome states that has already arisen, we encourage.
Okay, let's say stabilize.
Stabilize.
So wholesome states that have already arisen, one stabilizes, strengthens them, develops them, and fulfills them. Okay, so those are the four right efforts, the four bases for spiritual power. Well, we went through them 2 weeks ago, and come, please help me. wrong?
And then Bohui will translate.
Okay.
No, you should be able to translate in your mind in English.
Okay. 欲勤心思维. 欲 is desire.
Okay.
勤 is diligence.
Okay.
Or effort.
Or effort, energy, yeah.
Or energy, right? 心 is the mind.
Yeah.
思维, I guess, is contemplation.
Usually we render that as investigation.
Investigation.
Yeah. Okay, so the four bases for spiritual power are desire. This is the wholesome desire. Then energy or vigor. Third is the mind, using the purity or concentration of the mind. And then investigation or inquiry. Okay, now the 5 spiritual faculties. Now you guys have to be preserving the Buddha's teaching, so you have to, without any quarrels or conflicts, you have to know these.
Okay, it's the faith, energy, mindfulness,
Yeah,
concentration,
yeah.
and wisdom.
Okay, very good. So faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. Those are the 5 spiritual faculties. The 5 powers. Johnny, you...
It's the same, so I raise my hand, I can answer.
Okay, so it's the power of faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. Okay, the 7 factors of enlightenment. Pull away.
The enlightenment factor of mindfulness, of investigation of the Dharma, of energy, and then of rapture, of tranquility, of samadhi, and of equanimity.
Okay, very good. Okay, mindfulness, then investigation of phenomena, of dhammas, energy, rapture or joy, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. 7. Then we have Eightfold Noble Path. What are the 8 factors of the path in the correct order? Barbara, you want to try? No? Wow, you guys have... I know that Oswald, you know because you got it last 2 weeks ago. But we have to get some of the others. Vivian, you want to try? Eight factors. See you.
I might get the order wrong. Samma Ditti, the right view. Samma Sankappa, right thoughts.
Okay.
Samma Vacha, right words. Samma Ajiva, right livelihood.
No. Okay, you had right speech, yeah.
Right speech. Samma Kammanta, right effort.
No, you have the Pali right, but not the English.
Right things you do.
What do we call the things you do? Simple term.
Action, right action. Samaja, right livelihood. Samma sati, right. Right effort, samma vayama.
Right.
Samma sati, right mindfulness.
Yeah.
Samma samadhi, right concentration.
Okay, right concentration. Okay, so you got it correctly. So it's right view, right thought or right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Okay, next week there'll be a test. So really, these things you should all be able to just knock off 1, 2, 3. You write them all down on a sheet of paper and memorize them. Excuse me?
How many languages do we need to know?
I think it's enough to know Pali, Sanskrit, Chinese, and English. But if you just know in English, it'll be enough. Okay, so this is what the Buddha is emphasizing. The 7 groups, which come to be called the 37 Bodhipakkhiyadhammas, the 37 aids to enlightenment. Okay, so now Ananda says that I do not see even 2 monks who are making different claims about these things, but there are people who live deferential towards the Buddha who might, after he is gone, create a dispute in the Sangha about livelihood, that's the way of life, and about the patimokkha. And such a dispute would be for the harm and unhappiness of many, for the loss, harm, and suffering of gods and humans. Now this seems a little bit strange, but here the Buddha says a dispute about livelihood or about the patimokkha would be trifling. He uses the word appamattako, Ananda. But should a dispute arise in the Sangha about the path or the way, the 2 words used here in Pali is magga is the path and patipada is the way, or patipada also you could translate the practice. That dispute would be the harm and unhappiness of many, for the loss, harm, and suffering of gods and human beings. I say that when it's said that the dispute about livelihood or about the patimokkha is trifling, that seems strange, because elsewhere there's a passage where it's actually at the beginning of the Vinaya Pitaka, where Venerable Sariputta comes to the Buddha and he asks him, what is the reason why the sasana, the teaching of some Buddhas in the past, lasted a long time, but the teaching of other Buddhas was short-lived and came to an end soon after their passing away. And then the Buddha answers that the reason why the teaching of some Buddhas lasted a long time was because those Buddhas gave many teachings to their disciples, gave many discourses, and laid down the patimokkha, the rules of discipline. Whereas some of the other Buddhas would just give teachings on the spot to their disciples, just according to circumstance. And so they didn't give very many elaborate teachings, and they didn't lay down the rules of discipline. And then in this passage, the Buddha compares the patimokkha, or code of discipline, to a thread, a string, which is used to hold flowers together. So if you have a string and you tie the flowers onto the string and you make a garland, then the flowers will stay together for a long time until they wither. But if you just have the flowers heaped up without the string to hold them together, then when the wind blows, the flowers get scattered. And so in this passage, the Buddha says that the code of discipline, the patimokkha, the training rules, that is like the thread that holds the flowers together. That is what preserves the teaching for a long time. And so one would think, certainly, that at least the primary rules would be, in fact, this is maybe the way to interpret this passage, is that the primary rules would be the ones that are essential for preserving the teaching. But there could be other rules which the Buddha called kudakka. These would be minor and secondary rules, that those would probably be, he's probably foresaw that those could be subject to variation depending upon things like climate, geographical conditions, cultures of the people amongst whom Buddhism takes root, and so on. So I think this particular passage needs some interpretation to make it clear. We shouldn't think, when you see this, that, okay, the Buddha said the disagreement about the patimokkha is trifling, therefore we just have to get rid of the patimokkha, and we just have the monks observing 5 precepts the same as lay people, and that will preserve the Dhamma for a long time. Okay, so now, after setting up this passage where the Buddha emphasizes what is the core or essence, now he's going to teach how disputes arise by taking disputes and conflicts, tracing them to their roots. And I think this passage shows what you might call the strong psychological orientation of the Buddha's own teaching. So for him, what's of primary importance are the mental qualities or mental states of the people in the community. So if we keep a watch on our own mental states, then even though there might be disagreements about aspects of the teaching, but through discussion and inquiry, investigation, then we can resolve those disagreements. But if the unwholesome mental states are what's motivating the dispute, then even the most trivial thing can become the basis for a dispute. Okay, so here the Buddha is now speaking about what's called the 6 roots of disputes. But actually, if you look at them, they actually turn out to be more than 6, but a few of the qualities which are similar are grouped together into pairs. So he says, first, a monk is angry and resentful. So when a monk is angry and resentful, then he becomes disrespectful and undeferential towards the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and he does not fulfill the training. And then it's such a monk as that who creates a dispute in the Sangha, which would be for the harm and unhappiness of many, and so on. Okay, so first, you could see how systematically the Buddha is going to treat this. First, the Buddha points out what is the root of dispute. in this case, anger and resentment. Then he shows the consequence that it leads to a dispute and it brings about the harm and unhappiness of many. And then he points out what to do about it. So if you see any such root of dispute, either in yourself, well, first in yourself, then you should strive to abandon that evil root of dispute in yourself. And then if you see that evil dispute, evil root of dispute externally, that is, if you see others who are in the grip of anger and resentment, then also you have to take action to eliminate it. Of course, you can't just do it through your own inner psychological effort, but if there's somebody else who's angry and resentful, then you have to speak to them and try to find out why they're angry and resentful, and try to help them to overcome anger and resentment. In that way, you preserve the harmony of the group. Okay, but if you don't see any such root of dispute, either in yourself or externally, then you should practice in such a way that that evil root does not arise in the future. Thus there is the abandoning of that evil root of dispute, and there is no eruption of that evil root of dispute in the future. You see, so many aspects, just a very short statement, but so many aspects in oneself, externally. Abandon it if you see it. If you don't see it, practice in such a way that it doesn't arise in the future. Okay, then the Buddha goes, so that's just the first root of dispute. The second is being contemptuous, that is sort of looking down at others and treating them arrogantly. And then its counterpart is being insolent, insulting others, speaking about them in derogatory, denigrating ways. Then envy, when others are successful or have good qualities, then one becomes envious of them. And because one doesn't like others to have good qualities, then sometimes one might smear them, malign them, speak bad about them to others, try to create discomfort for them. And then avarice, I think that's not such a good translation. Better to translate miserliness. This is when one acquires things, then one doesn't want to share them with others. So, there are some monks that get a lot of robes, and then they just store the robes, but even if they see that other monks don't have good robes, the robes are worn out, they're afraid to give one of their extra robes to others. Or if they have some good lay supporters, then they try to keep the lay supporters to themselves. They don't want to introduce them to other monks, afraid that the lay people will start to support other monks and then their support will drop off. Okay, so this is kinds of miserliness. And also the most important kind of miserliness that the Buddha mentions elsewhere, not here, is miserliness with the Dhamma. That is, a monk who has learned a lot of Dhamma doesn't want to share it with others because he likes to be well known as, a learned, erudite monk, a great preacher, scholar, and so he doesn't want to teach others because he's afraid that they will get a lot of knowledge and then they will shine. Okay, so this is miserliness, then fraudulence, that is doing things which are wrong but trying to cover them up, conceal them, and deceitfulness, which means trying to display oneself, to show oneself as having virtues that one doesn't have. So, a monk might not be, very well developed, but when he comes into a group, particularly a group of wealthy lay people, he'll come walking. Very like he's mindful of every step. Then makes it seem like he's pausing before sitting. Sits down. They're gone. Get out my cigars. Light up. Okay. Fraudulence, deceitfulness, evil wishes. These are, wishing for fame, honor, reputation. And then wrong view, particularly the view that there are no consequences to good and bad deeds. That's considered to be the most pernicious of the wrong views. And then the last one, and this is a very serious cause of disputes within a group, and that is adhering to one's own views, holding on to them tenaciously, and relinquishing them with difficulty. This is being stubbornly attached to one's own opinions and views. Often we have to undergo special training to be able to get rid of that kind of fault, because it seems to be a natural tendency, even within, well, maybe especially within monastic communities, people become learned, and then they develop particular views, and then they hold to those views very tenaciously and refuse to relinquish them. Like the view that space is an unconditioned dharma, or that there's such a thing as non-deliberative cessation. Okay, I think I've mentioned previously that when I first started to learn about Buddhism, at that time I was in graduate school. This was before I became a monk. And I was living with a Vietnamese monk who had come to study in the same graduate school which I was attending. And I had just been reading about Buddhism, for a few months. And then I went to learn Buddhism from him. And basically my reading in Buddhism was from Alan Watts and D.T. Suzuki. These were the books that were available, and primarily available in the 1960s. 1967. And so whenever the monk who was my teacher would tell me something about Buddhism and it didn't agree with what I was reading in Alan Watts and D.T. Suzuki, then I would disagree with him and think he was getting it wrong. I really would hold to those views very stubbornly and very insistently and think, this is what Alan Watts says. This is what D.T. Suzuki says. And he would be looking in, these thick volumes, since he was Vietnamese, like he was reading in the classical Chinese, and say, well, this is what the Agama says. This is what the Majjhima Agama says. But I would still say, they have it wrong. I'm right. But how to overcome this? And it really used to cause so much trouble in my mind. And then, I was also starting to practice meditation. So right after, whenever we would have these big fights, then I would sit down and try to meditate. And just the mind would be boiling over with these angry thoughts that I'm right, he's wrong, I'm right, he's wrong. My view is correct, that view is incorrect. So then one day, when I was getting really upset, then my teacher called me and he said, what you should do now, every day you have to tell yourself, if I get into a dispute today, I have to remember I might be right, I might be wrong. What's important is not that I should be right and the other person should be wrong, but that we should try to arrive at the truth. And so every day I would have to recite that to myself. And then it seemed to work a little bit. Okay, so the rest of the paragraph just repeats the same thing. Same method applies to each of these roots of dispute. Okay, before we go into the next section, maybe I should pause and ask whether there's any questions. And anything covered so far, or comments? Okay, now this gets a little technical, this section. But we'll go through it, maybe not in detail, but we'll see what is being brought forward here. So this is sort of where the Sutta teaching is almost bordering or coming into Vinaya or discipline type teachings. So here the Buddha says that there are these four kinds of, maybe the word litigation, it's a difficult word to use, maybe not a fully appropriate word, because litigation implies that people are going to court and suing one another and calling in lawyers. But these are types of grounds for collective action within the Sangha, for settling particular cases that arise. Maybe you could say four kinds of cases that might arise that require special treatment. So what is the four? So there's litigation because of a dispute, litigation because of an accusation, litigation because of an offense, and litigation concerning proceedings or duties or activities that are to be carried out. The word here, the Pali word, is adhikarana. So the four kinds of cases that arise are, the word is adhikarana. From the word karana means action, and adhi gives it the sense of a basis for something that has to take place on top of that action. And then there's another word which is used in connection with these cases that arise, and this is the word samatha, which it's the same word that we use in relation to meditation when we speak about samatha meditation. But here it doesn't mean quieting down the mind and making the mind concentrated. But here samatha means bringing peace or settling the particular case that has arisen. So these are the samatha, are the means of settling these legal cases or disciplinary cases. And so from this you'll see that the Buddha was not only a masterful teacher in the sense of one who, presented a doctrine and a method of practice, but he was also a very brilliant and very skillful organizer and administrator, one who knew how to bring a group together and to lay down guidelines to ensure that the group is properly regulated. And so, after mentioning the 4 types or 4 bases for litigation or 4 bases for settlement, then the Buddha mentions the 7 kinds of settlement of litigation. So these are the 7 adhikarana samatha, the 7 means of settling these cases of litigation. And first he just enumerates them, and then we'll just go through the list and then see how they're applied. There is the removal of litigation by confrontation. Maybe confrontation, not a good word. We could say in the presence of. Removal of litigation by bringing into the presence of. Removal of litigation by means of memory. Removal of litigation on account of past insanity. The acknowledgement of an offense, the opinion of the majority, the pronouncement of bad character against someone, and then the 7th is called covering over with grass. Okay, so we have the first kind of case that can arise, the first basis for litigation, and that is a dispute. Okay, so here we have a case where the monks are disputing. One group is saying, this is the Dhamma. Another group is saying, that's not the Dhamma. One group is saying, this is discipline. The other group is saying, that's not the correct discipline. And so there's a dispute, a conflict between these 2 parties. And so now the Buddha is going to explain how to settle this case by means of, here it's translated confrontation, but better rendered by bringing into the presence of. So what the Buddha says is that here all of those monks who are in dispute should all meet together in concord. It doesn't mean that immediately the dispute is solved, resolved, but they're going to stop quarreling and sit down together, determined to resolve the dispute. So then, when they have met together, what is called here now the guideline of the Dhamma should be drawn out. The word used is Dhamma neti. Neti can mean, like one of the meanings is a thread or a rope. And so this is pulling out from the teaching, you might call the basic direction or the fundamental principles. And so one pulls out or draws out from the teaching the guideline. And then the text says, well, once the guideline of the Dhamma has been drawn out, that litigation, that dispute, should be settled in a way that accords with it. So this is the removal of litigation by bringing into the presence of. And the commentary says, you bring into the presence of because the monks who are disputing are coming into the presence of one another, and they're also coming into the presence of the Dhamma, trying to settle a dispute by examining the Dhamma. You know, it seems that there could still be differences in interpretation, so that the settlement of the dispute is not guaranteed. But assuming that the monks want to live together peacefully and harmoniously, and that their purpose in becoming monks is not to win debates, but to practice in a way for liberation. So then when they meet together in concord, then they will investigate the teachings, perhaps bringing in a monk or some monks who are very learned and knowledgeable, and seeking their views of the teaching, asking them for advice, for guidance in how to interpret the teaching. Okay, so the second means of settling a dispute, we're still dealing with disputes, and this is the opinion of majority. So if the monks can't settle the dispute in their own dwelling place, if there's just a few monks, then they should go to another dwelling place where there's a greater number of monks. And then it said they should all meet together in harmony, and in the presence of the larger number of monks, then they should draw out the guideline of the Dhamma. Maybe within the original group of monks there's nobody who's very learned, so they go to a larger community and they consult with a single monk or a committee of learned monks who could settle a dispute for them. Actually, the detailed explanation says that, if they still can't settle it, then they have to abide, they have to, find out what is the opinion of the majority, and then abide by the view of the majority. And so in this way there comes to be the settlement of this dispute by the opinion of the majority. Okay, so these are two ways of settling a dispute. In the original place, one draws out the guideline of the Dhamma and settles it, or else one goes to a place with a greater number of monks and then settles it there according to the opinion of the greatest number of monks. Okay, in section 16, now we're dealing with an accusation. This is how to settle an accusation, where one monk or several monks accuse another monk of committing a very serious transgression. That is what's called a parajika. That's an offense which requires expulsion from the order, or one which is bordering on a parajika, one getting close to an expulsion offense. So in this case, one is asking the monk who is accused whether he remembers having committed such a grave offense. And he says, I do not remember having committed such an offense. And in this case, if that monk is regarded as a trustworthy monk, everybody respects him, and he's regarded highly within the community, not the kind of person that one would suspect of lying and promulgating a falsehood to justify his misconduct, then on the basis of his claim from memory, one accepts it, and then one dismisses the accusation based on his memory. The next case deals with what is called the removal of litigation on account of past insanity. And this is also a method which is used to settle a case of accusation, where a monk has apparently committed a serious, a grave offense, and another monk is accusing him of that transgression. But in this case, the monk who is accused of the offense has actually committed that offense, but he had gone temporarily insane at the time that he committed that offense. And it's a principle in the Vinaya that if a monk is out of his mind or temporarily insane when he commits an offense, then he's not liable for the consequences of that offense. His action, his transgression, is not an offense because he was insane. Okay, so in this case, one monk is accusing another of committing a grave offense, one which requires expulsion or is bordering on expulsion. They ask him whether he remembers having committed that offense. He says, "I don't remember committing it," but despite the denial, then the accusing monk presses him further and says, "Surely you know quite well that you committed that offense." And then the monk who's being accused now says that I had gone mad, I had lost my mind. When I was mad, I said and did many things improper for a recluse. I don't remember, so I must have been mad when I did that. So in his case, the past insanity is declared for him. And in this way, the accusation is suspended and the monk is not liable for the offense. And so in this case, the accusation is settled by means of the claim of past insanity. Okay, now we come to section 18, and this is the method to be used when a monk commits a transgression and he remembers the transgression and he wants to clear himself of it. And this is a transgression not of the very grave kind, but of a kind which can be settled through confession to another monk. This is the usual way for clearing up offenses. There are two kinds of offenses which are grave offenses. One kind, if one commits that offense, one has to be expelled from the order. This is the four grave or expulsion offenses: engaging in sexual intercourse, stealing something of such value that one can be imprisoned or otherwise legally punished for it, murdering another human being, or making false claims to supernormal attainments. Then there are 13 offenses. If one commits them, one can't clear them simply by confession, but one has to confess in front of the whole Sangha, and then one has to undergo a series of penalties in the presence of the whole Sangha, and then one has to be reinstated again through an act of the whole Sangha. But any other offense can be cleared by confession to another monk. So that is the case being described here. So when a monk has committed an offense, then what he does is to reveal it and disclose it to another monk. So he goes to a senior monk, or if there's no one senior, he can even go to a junior monk. He arranges his robes and pays homage at his feet, and then in the presence of that monk, he confesses to the offense and makes a pledge to restrain himself in the future. And so in that way, the transgression is cleared up simply through confession. Okay, paragraph 19, and this is called the pronouncement of bad character against someone. And I'm not going to go through this in detail, but this is the procedure that's used when a monk is accused of a serious offense. He refuses to acknowledge it, but the other monks know that that monk has committed that offense. And so they keep on questioning him. The monk who's being accused keeps on answering evasively or denying his responsibility. And so they keep on pressing him and pressing him. He even claims that when he committed it, he was joking, raving, and so on.